All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. Sorry, we're getting started a few moments late. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors, Baruch Hashem, for this morning's share. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. To thank Yanky and Aliza, Statman, Yitzy, and Rebecca Statman for dedicating the Sherman Joshos this month, the commemoration of the first yarzheit of their sister, Menucha Shaindl Yehudis, Zichron Levracha, Bas Dovid Yosef. To thank Shmuel and Robyn Korobkin for dedicating all the shiurim this month in this chus. The commemoration of the 25th yarzheit of Rabin's mother, Melanie Solomon, Pessa Mira, Bas Chaim Zichron Levracha. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Zevi Shoshy Daniel, nishmas Refoel Yaakov ben Avraham. That's Zevi's stepfather who was just nifter yesterday. The Levi is today at 1 o'clock. We wish the family an incredible amount of strength and nechama. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Binyomin Fleischman in memory of his father, Rabbi Shmuel Yudel ben Binyomin Yaakov Zichron Levracha, and our Daf Yomi sponsors, Sima and Saeed Haken, to express their Hakarat Hatov to Hashem for Baruch Hashem, the birth of their grandson, to Yael and David Issever. Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. And I will say, with that, let us begin. So good to start with Mesilas Yesharim, Baruch Hashem. And I will say, by the way, just for Mesilas Yesharim, for those who have not been part of the yarzheit program, so again, all of the previous shiurim, where this was the 39th shiur in the yarzheit program for Mesilas Yesharim. If you haven't been doing it, they're all online. It's easy enough to catch up, Baruch Hashem. And also, again, we've done it before. Baruch Hashem, a beautiful, beautiful way just to learn a magnificent sefer. And again, we're done in now 5 months. Less than 5 months from now, Meretz Hashem. Good. Today's daf is daf Zayin, 7a. We'll say incredible Gemara today. 7a. So we left off literally on the first line. Yish yad litzdaka ein yad litzdaka. So remember again, we are continuing in this interesting discussion. We've established the concept of yados. Remember one more time, the concept of yad comes from Nazir, and Baruch Hashem, we saw Nazir lahazir, and then again the hekish between Nazir and Nedarim, and then I will say we're kind of building that out a little bit. So we tried to figure out, does yad apply to kiddushin? Ultimately, again, does yad apply to payah? So we're trying to expand this a little bit and see other cases where yados could possibly work. So yesh yad l'tzedakah in yad l'tzedakah. Does the concept of yad apply to tzedakah? Does the partial declaration work for tzedakah or not? So the Gemara said, well, what's the case? Hechidami. Ilema damar hadein zuzul tzedakah v'hadein nami. So I'll say, if you tell me it's the following case, I say, this zuz should be for tzedakah, and this one also. So if you can imagine, I have 2 coins in front of me, and literally, I say, this coin should be for tzedakah, and this one also. So the truth is, Rabbi said, the Gemara says, that's obvious. Hahu tzedakah atzma. Of course that works. So Rabbi said, why? Because why? That's not really even a yad. That's kind of an explicit, complete declaration. Right? So rather, what's the case? Elokegon da amar hadein v'lo amar nami. Oh, so we'll say, what's the case? The case where I have 2 coins. Right? So zuz number 1, I say hare zu litzdaka or hadein zuzo litzdaka. Right? This zuz should be for tzedakah. And then when it comes to the other coin, I say hadein. And this one. Once again, what am I missing? Nami also. I'm missing that. So now the shaila is, how do we interpret this phrase? Do we say mai? So we say, what does this mean? Hadein nami l'tzedakah kamar? Am I saying that this particular second zuz should also be for tzedakah? O dilma, mai v'hadein. What does it mean v'hadein? What do I mean when I say and this one? Linafkusa ba'alma ka'amar. What I mean to say is this second one should be used for general expenses. And I just simply never got a chance to finish my statement. That's really what I meant to say was v'hadein, and the second one should be for, the first one is for tzedakah, and the second one should, and the second one, the rest of the sentences should be used for general expenses. But I just never got around to finishing the statement. So we'll say, so that's the shaila. So we'll say, by the way, it's the same pattern as every question before. So obviously, again, if I say the first zuz is for tzedakah, v'hadein nami, and ultimately, again, this zuz as well, referring to the second one, of course the second one becomes tzedakah. The shaila is, I say the first zuz is for tzedakah, and then when it comes to the second one, I say, and this one. So how do we interpret that? And this one is also for tzedakah, and this one is for general expenses. That's the shaila. So the Gemara says as follows, Rabbi. So the Gemara says, Mi amrinan kevan de iskish lekarbanos. So I'll say, here we go. Now remember, in general, the concept of yad, as we've seen it, right, begins with nezirus, extends to nedarim. Now, once it extends to nedarim, also included in that are karbanos, right? Because a person can make a neder to go ahead and bring a karban. So now watch this. Now the Gemara backs up a little bit, and the Gemara says, well, one second. Why would we think that a yad works by tzedakah altogether? So now the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Mi amrinan kevan de iskish lekarbanos dichsev beficha zu tzedakah. So Rabbi said, listen to this. Because on one hand, I would say tzedakah is compared to karbanos. Now, where is tzedakah compared to karbanos? So Rabbi says, so the pasuk says, motzas svasecha. Motzas svasecha tishmar, that which you utter with your lips, you should honor, you should keep. Va'asisa kasher nadartu l'Hashem elokecha, you should do that which you vowed to Hashem. Nedava asher dibarta beficha. Ultimately, again, a nedava that you spoke out with your lips. So both say, so again, on one hand, the pasuk is referring to karbanos, both neder and nedava. Beficha, the Gemara also understands to be referring to tzedakah. Referring to tzedakah. So you see this hekish, you see this comparison between tzedakah and karban. So do we say, ma karbanos yesh lehen yad, just like a karban has yad, in other words, yados work by karbanos, partial declarations work by karbanos, af tzedakah yesh yad, so too again, yad works by tzedakah, o dilma, or maybe not to both. I said again, that's the havamina, or maybe no, or dilma, lebal ta'achar hu de iskish. Or maybe Rabbi say what? Maybe no halacha l'maisa. The comparison of tzedakah to karbanos is not to tell me that yad works. Rather, what does it do? It tells me that just as a karban is subject to bal ta'acher, so to what? Tzedakah is also subject to bal ta'acher. Just like a karban, if you take upon yourself an obligation to bring a karban, or if you have an obligation to bring a karban, you are not allowed to delay. And delaying your obligation is a violation of a biblical prohibition. So too, if you make a neder for tzedakah, right, you have to pay up that neder as soon as you can, and delaying it is also going to be asr. Incredible. So we'll say, so now, I want to point out, the Gemara doesn't answer it. So the Gemara leaves it as an open-ended question, is there a yad for tzedakah or not? So therefore, Rabbi says, so far, we have again, yesh yad l'kiddushin, right, at the end of the day, is there, right, is partial declaration for kiddushin work? Second question we had is there a yad for payah? And then now we'll say third question is there yad for tzedakah? Okay, let's go. We'll keep going. Yesh yad lahefker. So let's listen to this. Does a yad work for hefker? Do partial declarations work for hefker or not? So the Gemara says, so odilma, in yad lahefker. So the Gemara says, hainu tzedakah. This is interesting. So we'll say, isn't hefker essentially the same thing as tzedakah? In other words, as I will say, both are cases where what? I'm giving away something which belongs to me. Right? I'm relinquishing ownership over something that belongs to me. So in other words, what the Gemara is just asking, isn't it the same question? In other words, obviously, there are differences between hefker and tzedakah, but both represent a relinquishing of ownership to, we'll call it someone or a group. So therefore, again, isn't it the same shayla? In other words, if there's yad with tzedakah, then the pashtos, there would be a yad for hefker. To which the Gemara says, Imtim Salomar Kamar. So listen to this. Imtim Salomar Yeshad L'Tzdaka. So let's say now watch this. What does the Gemara means to say? Imtim Salomar Yeshad L'Tzdaka. If you hold that there is a yad for tzedakah, right? If halacha l'maisa, you hold that there is yad for tzedakah, then what? So the Gemara says, De'ein hekish l'mechza. Because remember again, if we hold that there's a yad l'tzedakah, now when would you hold this yad l'tzedakah? De'ein hekish l'mechza. I will say, ein hekesh l'mechza means, when you make a hekesh, when you make a comparison between two things, that comparison is absolute. Now watch this. Now remember again, I will say, if you hold that there is a yad for tzedakah, what is that based on? Where would we get that from, that there's a yad for tzedakah, based on what a comparison between tzedakah and karbanos? Excellent. So now I will say, if you agree to that, then that hekesh, that comparison, is going to be absolute and complete. So So therefore, again, ein heker shlamechza, then hefker mi'arminin hainu tzedakah. So we'll say, okay, so now that if you agree with the idea, or if you subscribe to the concept, that there is a yad for tzedakah, okay? Therefore, again, we'll say what that means is that essentially we compare tzedakah to carbon in multiple ways, meaning we'll say that just like a carbon is subject to Baal Ta'acher, not delaying, so too again, payment of tzedakah is also subject to Baal Ta'acher. And just like Yad works by karbanos, so too Yad will work by tzedakah. So therefore, again, I would say the same thing. Then mir hainu tzedakah. Then I will say the next step will be: do I agree that essentially hefker is the same? We'll call it mechanism, same framework as tzedakah. Therefore, again, just like Yad will work by tzedakah, so too Yad will work by hefker. O Dilma, or what's the other possibility is, or perhaps, shiny tzedakah. No, maybe tzedakah and hefker are not really the same thing. Why? So the Gemara says, the tzedakah lo chazi ela la'aniyim. Tzedakah is only fit, right, for aniyim, for the poor. Tzedakah lo chazi ela la'aniyim. Aval hefker, bein la'aniyim, bein la'ashirim. But ultimately, again, hefker is ultimately usable both for the poor as well as the rich. Okay, so we'll say, so that's our question. Now, once again, the Gemara doesn't resolve it. So we'll say, so now another open-ended question. Is there a yad for hefker or not? A partial declaration by hefker doesn't work or not. The Gemara leaves it as an open-ended question. Another one. By Ravina. Ravina has a shayla. Yesh yad lebeis hakisei. So we'll say, this now, by the way, is a total detour. So watch this. Is there a yad for a beis hakisei? Now, what does that mean? Right? Beis hakisei is a bathroom, right? So, what does that mean? So, we'll say, I'll draw your attention to something very interesting. We'll say, one of the things I just want to point out to you in Maseches Nedarim is, if you notice, there's a lot of mafarshim on the page. And so the truth is, a lot of times we're not going through a lot of these mafarshim. So, again, obviously, if you ever have a couple of moments, it's also interesting to see the mafarshim are very often at odds with each other, just about how to read and understand the Gemara. So I just want to fulfill this full disclosure for Daf Yomi purposes. Again, through a Daf, I'm often not giving you the full panoramic view of how everyone's understanding the Gemara, most often just according to the Ran. But I will show you something interesting. If you look on the bottom right-hand corner over here, you will find the Rosh, which is also one of the interesting anomalies of, not anomalies, one of the interesting things about Nedarim is that whereas normally the Rosh is in the back of the Gemara, here in Maseches Nedarim he's on the page. So look at the Rosh, you see it in the bottom right-hand margin. You see it there? So I will say, so I'm assuming most of us have the same type of pagination. So again, if you look in the Rosh, about 3-4 lines up from before, the Rosh gets wide. Yesh yad lebeis hakisei, midrabanan kaboy. I will say, listen to this. So now I will say, we're switching gears a little bit, because this concept, ultimately, again, of the question, is a question in rabbinic law. Now, what is the question? Umikra devahayom achanecha kadosh lo yadinad ela beis hakisei atzmo umibayilei iavud rabbanon harchaka le'esar gam yad beis hakisei. Then I will say, now watch this. There is a concept of beis hakisei is where a person takes care of their physical needs. So I will say, there's a concept over here of that once you designate a place as a beis hakisei, even if halacha l'maisa, you haven't used it, it takes on the status of a beis hakisei. Takes on the status of a beis hakisei. Now I will say, what's the ramifications of taking on the status of a beis hakisei? Again, I apologize for taking you all over the place. Jump now to the Ran, top left-hand column, second line in. Yeshad lebeis hakisei she'asr likros bo kriya shema. So we'll say, here it is. I know, for example, I'm not allowed to say shema. I'm not allowed to daven in a beis hakisei. Get down in a beis hakisei. So I will say, now listen to this. The Gemara is presupposing the concept of hazmana milsa. Hazmana milsa means that going ahead and dedicating something for a particular use establishes it or vests it with that status, even though it has not yet been used. So, for example, if you go ahead and you do the ribbon cutting, right, welcome everyone to the brand new Beis Hakisei, right? This is it. So now we've dedicated the Beis Hakisei. There's a concept in halacha that hazmana milsa. It happens. It's a machlokes. So I'll say, by the way, I'll give you just a simpler example of this. which is actually interesting. Imagine for a moment a person gets a tefillin bag. A brand new tefillin bag. So you haven't used it yet. You haven't put your tefillin in it yet. We actually spoke about this as smichas chaver, one of the previous zmanim, right? So what happens? You haven't used it yet, and you decide, you know what? I don't want to use it for my tefillin. I want to use it for lunch. A lunch bag. It's beautiful. It has my name on it in Hebrew. It's leather. It's fur. It's whatever it is. It's fantastic. It's a designer lunch bag. That's what I want to use. So can I use it? Obviously, once I've put my tefillin in there, I can't use it anymore for anything other than tefillin. But the shayla is right now I haven't yet put my tefillin in there. All I've done, so we'll say this is a machlokes. It's a machlokes of hazmana milsa, hazmana lav milsa. Is designated something for a particular use. Does that vest it with kedusha or not? So we'll say this is the opposite over here. Let's assume right now that designation of an area as a beis hakise, as a bathroom, by definition, vests it with bathroom identity. To the point now that I am not allowed to say Kriyas Shema in that space. So here's the shayla. What if I go ahead and I just use a partial declaration? I just use a yad. Just use a partial declaration. Whatever the lashon. Well, let's see. So the Gemara says, Hechidami, what's the case? First one line of us back in the Gemara. Hechidami. Ilema damar hadein beis ale have a beis hakise v'hadein nami hao beis hakise nami hava. So I'll say it's the same drill. So again, let's imagine there's two rooms next to each other. So if I go ahead and I say this room is a beis hakise and this one is also, that's obvious, right? That's not even a yad, right? That's an explicit declaration. Ella kigom da amar v'hadein below amar nami. Rather, I will say, what's the case? Room number one, I say this will be a beis hakise, and then I say by the second room and this one. Once again, what don't I have in this declaration? What don't I have in here? Also, nami. Excellent. Good. So Mar says, so what's the halacha? Hadein da'amar v'hadein nami beis hakise. Am I saying this room should also be a beis hakise? O dilma mai v'hadein. Or perhaps what does v'hadein mean? L'tashmisha ba'al makamar. Or maybe Rabbi will say, what I meant to say was like this. What I meant to say was, this room should also be used for other, or I should say, and this room will be used for other purposes. So that's the shayla. So the Gemara says, good. Michlal, so we'll say, now the Gemara says, by the way, Michlal, the pshita de ravina, the yesh zimon beis hakise. Now, here's what's interesting about it. This is what I just mentioned before. This question presupposes that hazmana, dedicating a particular area for use as a beis hakise is actually a meaningful dedication. What we call in halacha, hazmana milsehi. This is presupposing that dedicating something for a particular use actually vests it with that halachic identity. So one second, but one second, this was actually a shayla that Ravina had. So the Gemara says, his minula beis hakise mahu, if a person dedicated a room for a beis hakise but didn't yet use it, does the dedication vest it with a beis hakise identity, or is minula beis hamerchas? We'll say same thing, by the way, with a bathhouse. Let's say you went ahead and you dedicated a particular area to be used as a bathhouse, but you haven't yet used it as a bathhouse. Mahu zimun moil o ein zimun moil. I will say, does dedicating a space vest it with that identity, even if you have not yet used it or not? So we'll say, so what the Gemara is asking over here is, whoa, like hold up. Why you're asking, does a yad work for beis hakise dedication? Before you get into that question, there's a more fundamental question, which is what? Does designating a space as a beis hakise vest it with beis hakise identity or not? To which the Gemara says, you're right. Ravina chada migo chada kamiboile. So this is actually very interesting. Ravina was really asking one question within another question. One question within another question. Right, we'll say, what are his two questions? Question number one is zimun moil o ein zimun moil. So we'll say question number one is, does hazmana work? Right, in general. By the way, as I mentioned before, this is not just the din in beis hakise. This is a din in a lot of things in halacha. But let's focus over here. Question number one, we'll say, is when you designate a space as a beis hakise, or for that matter as a beis hamerchatz, does zimun essentially again vest the space with beis hakise or beis hamerchatz identity? That's question number one. Good. Imtin Son Yesh Zimun. Oh, so now question number 2 is, if you hold that Zimun works, that designating a space ultimately goes ahead and vests that space with the identity, then what? Yesh Yad, O Ein Yad. Does it have a Yad? Doesn't it have a Yad? So we'll say, so now again, we've asked the question, right? So now the same question, Yesh Yad, Ein Yad, we've asked by Kiddushin, we've asked by Peah, we've asked by Tzedakah, we've asked by Hefker, we've asked by Beis HaKisei. 5 outstanding cases, right? I don't mean like outstanding cases. I mean like 5 just, right? Cases that we have not yet answered. Does Yad work? Unresolved cases. So I'll say, how does the sugya end? Tibayle. So I'll say, this is fascinating. Tibayle means you have a question. So also I want to show you something amazing. Take a look at Tosfos. I'm sorry. We're going to, today is like the sightseeing view on a daf of Maseches Nedarim. We'll say Tosfos is in the left margin. So you see Tosfos, I will say, in the short lines, 2, 4, 6, 8, about 10 lines before Tosfos becomes wide. Tibayi lecha, which Tosfos gives Tibayi lecha, Tibayi le, Perush kimo teku. Tibayi le is teku. And he says, V'lashon Nedarim mishuna. Tosfos says, the wording of Maseches Nedarim is mashu mishuna. Mishuna, different words in Nedarim. So I will say, it's actually interesting. You begin to see Nedarim is a very different kind of Masechta. The pages look different. Rashi's not Rashi, right? Tosfos is not on the, Tosfos is in the corner, the Ran is the primary one, the Rush is on the page. There's a lot of things different about Nedarim. One of the things different in Nedarim is we don't use Teku. I mean, we'll see actually, I think Teku does come up, the word is used, but in general, the Lashon for Nedarim is Tibayle. It's a question. I will say, by the way, you'll ask yourself, why does Nedarim employ different verbiage? Why does it employ different wording? So we'll say, remember again, what's interesting to note is, as I mentioned this when we started the Masechta, what's the whole Musar HaSkil of Maseches Nedarim? That words affect reality. Sometimes the way to go ahead and remind us that words affect realities is to change up, right? Commonly established or commonly used word choices as well. So that's the whole point of this, the whole takeaway of this Masechta is like we saw the Sfas Emes. Ish kiyafli. Words are a pella. Words are a wondrous amazement. That words could affect, that words could change realities, that our words make such a difference for ourselves and for others. So tell us Lashon, the Lashon Nedarim Mishuna. The Lashon of Maseches Nedarim, I'll say, it's a little bit different. So I'll say, if we have time, I want to get to the end of the daf, because I feel like I have like a streak to continue over here. So we'll get to it. I will say, I'll just point out the Ran, if you go back up to the top of the Ran, again, left-hand column, in the short lines, about 2, 4, 6 lines in. So the Ran himself says, Ule'inyan halacha b'kiddushin aktina l'chumra, v'yesh yad. Right? So the Ran himself says that by Kiddushin, we're going to be machmir, and if you use a yad to be mekadesh on Rabbi, remember again, what was the case of being of using a yad to be mekadesh woman? Remember, Reuben goes over to Rachel and Leah, he gives Rachel 2 prutos, he says to Rachel, Hare at mekudesh as li, right? And then he turns to Leah and he says, V'gamat, right? So we don't know exactly what that meant. So the Ran writes, we're going to go l'chumra. Because since Kiddushin is a Safek Daraisa, we're going to go l'chumra, and Leah is going to be Mikudeshes Misafek. Again, if we have time, he says, so the Rashba writes that by Peah and Tzedakah, we're also going to be machmir and say that a yad ultimately works. Again, I will say, the truth is we're going to be machmir in all of these cases by yados, because since ultimately the conclusion is teku, essentially, we have no choice but to be machmir. I will say the only possibility is the case will be mekel is in the case of a Beis HaKisei, because the whole concept of hazmana of a Beis HaKisei is a din d'Rabbanan. So since it's a din d'Rabbanan, safek d'Rabbanan l'kula. But again, so we'll say, so it sounds like we'll say there is a yad for Kiddush l'chumra, there is a yad for Peah l'chumra, there is a yad for Tzedakah l'chumra, there's a yad for Hefker l'chumra, but there is no yad for Beis HaKisei, because Beis HaKisei is a din d'Rabbanan. We'll say, first of all, in general, the concept of a Beis HaKisei having a certain identity is a d'Rabbanan. Hazmana of a Beis HaKisei, designating a Beis HaKisei is certainly a d'Rabbanan, and therefore again, safek of hazmana, such as in the case of the yad, will be lenient. That's the short version of halacha. There's more to do in the halacha, but that'll suffice for today. Weiter. Menu dani lecha. So we'll say back to the Mishnah. So remember again, the last line of the Mishnah we'll say was a lashon of. A person says menu dani lecha. Right? Ruvain says to Shimon, I am menuda to you. So the lashon of the Mishnah was Rabbi Akiva hayachochech bazel haken. Rabbi Akiva struggled with this, and he was machmir. So it says the Gemara, here we go. Amar Rabbi Yemod Rabbi Akiva le'inyan malchus sheino lokeh. Rabbi Akiva agrees that halacha l'maisa, when it comes to malchus, that a person would not get malchus. In other words, I will say, imagine if Reuven were to say to Shimon, menu dani lecha, which sounds like Reuven is saying to Shimon, I'm not going to get any benefit from you, right? And now what happens? Reuven gets benefit from Shimon. So even Rabbi Akiva would agree that Reuven doesn't get malchus for violating his neder, right? Why? Sigmar says, the imke nisti Rabbi Akiva machmir. Because it will say, otherwise it should have said Rabbi Akiva machmir. The fact that it said Rabbi Akiva struggled meant that Rabbi Akiva wasn't sure what to do with the neder of menu dalacha. He was machmir and said it was a neder, but wouldn't be so machmir to say that it's actually a valid neder, which would require Nedarim, which would require malchus for its violation. So the Gemara says, Amra Papa. So we'll say we're going to discuss a couple of different versions of the same type of lashon. Benedina minach to kuli amalo pligidazer. So we'll say if you use a lashon of nedina minach. Now we'll say nedina literally means detached. Reuven goes over to Shimon and he says, Nedina lacha. I am Nedina from you. Right? Nedina minach. I'm Nedina. So we'll say everyone agrees that is a valid lashon of a neder. And essentially, again, what Reuven is making a neder of is not to get any benefit from Shimon. Mishtamna minach, the kuli alma shari. Shabbos is very interesting. If you use lashon of mishtamna minach, I am mishtamna. Rabbi say, now what is mishtamna? Mishamtana, excuse me. Rabbi say, that sounds like shamta. Shamta is what? Is a form of excommunication. So if Reuven says to Shimon, mishamtana minach, I am mishamta from you, everyone agrees, that's permitted. That does not create any type of neder. Rabbi say, take a quick look at the Rush. The Rush says over here on the bottom. We'll say bottom right hand column. I should say bottom right margin. So you look 4 lines from the bottom of the Rush. Badina mimcha l'kulei alma aser demashma misnodet ani umuvdal mimach v'havitvei mimeruchukani mimach aliba de Shmuel. So let's listen to this. So the Rush explains. The Rush says the lashon of badina minach, I am separated from you or detached from you, is misnodet umuvdal. So we'll say, so the lashon of badina minach, I am detached from you, the Rush understands is a lashon of muvdal. I am separated from you. So that is a valid lashon of a neder. Versus mishamtana. Rush says the lashon shamtahu v'lo yad leneder. So I will say ultimately again, the Rush says that's not a lashon of neder. Saying that I'm excommunicated from you, that's not a lashon of a neder. I don't know what that is. Maybe that's just I don't want anything to do with you. But lamaisa, that's not a lashon of neder. He says, "Aval medina mashma no der v'lo lashon nidoy." So we'll say it's interesting. What you see the Gemara's fine tuning over here is, in order for a lashon of a neder to go ahead and be effective, there has to be a lashon of removal. Lashon of removal, right? So that's why again, lashon of nedina minach, I am detached from you. The Rush understands as a lashon of muvdal, I'm separate. Mishamtana minach, I'm excommunicated from you. Again, that might mean I want nothing to do with you, but Lamaisa, that's not a lashon of a neder. So my pligi. So we'll say, where does the machlokas come up? Amud Beis. Interesting. Bimenuda ani lecha. So we'll say the machlokas comes up in lashon of menuda ani. Menuda ani. Rabbi Akiva savar lishna dini duyahu. Rabbi Akiva understands that menuda is a lashon of detachment, a lashon of detached, a lashon of nedina. Rabbanon savri lishna dimishamtanahu. The Rabbanon hold no, that ultimately menuda is like mishamtana, excommunication. And just like mishamtana is not a lashon of a neder, so too again menuda is not a lashon of a neder as well. Upliga de Rav Chisda, and ultimately again this argues on Rav Chisda. Why? What happened? The Gemara tells a story. Dahu Gavra, the Amr Mishamtana ben Echase Dibrei Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. So there was a guy, and what did this guy say? He says this was his lashon. Ayim mishamtana, from the property of the son of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Okay, so now both say, so the shaila was, what's the impact of that statement? So they came before Rav Chisda, and Rav Chisda said, "Les dechash la lahad Rabbi Akiva." No one is mindful, right? No one pays attention to the psak of Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva was the one who held that lashon of mishamtana could potentially affect the neder. To which the Gemara says, "Kasavar b'shem mishamtana pligi." So both say, obviously, again, this is an alternate version. So both say, in the version we just mentioned before, last line of Zayin Amud Aleph going on to Zayin Amud Beis, everyone agreed that what? The lashon of mishamtana is not a lashon of neder. Is not a lashon of neder. Everyone agrees to that. The machlokes case was the case of menuda. Rabbi Akiva said menuda is niduya, detached, valid neder. Rabbanan said no, menuda is a lashon of mishamtana. All the Gemara just pointing out over here is there's an alternate version, and in the alternate version there's a machlokes about mishamtana. And in that version, Rabbi Akiva holds that mishamtana is a valid lashon of neder. Incredible. Good. So let's say, so again, so let's just pause here for just a moment. So what we have is like this. What we have over here is the fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan is in a lashon of menuda. So right, let's go with our first version. In our first version, everyone agrees that mishamtana, what's the status of mishamtana minach? What's the halacha? Everyone agrees? Not a neder. Why? Because Rabbi say, for a neder to be effective, the lashon itself has to be one of separation, havdalah, separation. If the lashon doesn't carry with it an immediate connotation of separation, it doesn't work. So in the first version, mishamtana ultimately doesn't work. What will work? Nedina. Nedina means detached. Like the Rosh said, Nedina means muvdal, separation. Where's the machlokes? Now we go back to the Mishnah. The machlokes is as espoused in the Mishnah of what happens if you use the lashon of menuda. Menuda. Rabbi Akiva says menuda is niduya, detached. Right? The Rabbanan say no. Menuda is in the same excommunication family as mishamtana, and therefore doesn't work. So I'll say, I just want to point out, everyone is agreeing on the core principle, right? What's the core principle? That for a lashon of neder to work, I have to be actively distancing myself from someone, and the lashon itself has to be a lashon of havdalah. The machlokes is in menuda, verse menuda. So I'll say, when we hear menuda, when I say menuda, what do you think about? Just a little word association. I say menuda, you think? Right? Excommunication, shamta. Right? Shamta. Right? No, what else are you thinking about? Right? Good. All right, fine. Right, so ultimately you think excommunication. All Rabbi Akiva is saying is, that's not the act. No, in fact, if you look at the word menuda, most closely resembles what? Niduya, right? Which is a lashon ultimately again of being separated. So that's the machlokes. But everyone is agreeing on the core principle. Good. We'll say, here we go. We'll say, now that we brought up, by the way, the concept of excommunication, so interestingly enough, the Gemara goes on a little bit of a tangent, a fascinating one. So let's listen to this. Rabbi loy Rav. Nidol b'fanav in matirin lo ela b'fanav. Listen to this. If you say there are two different forms of excommunication. You could excommunicate a person in their presence or not in their presence. Okay, so we'll discuss both. So the Gemara says, if you excommunicate the person b'fanav in his presence, ein matirin lo ela b'fanav. You can only undo the excommunication in his presence as well. Nidol shelo b'fanav, but if you excommunicated a person not in his presence, then matirin lo bein b'fanav bein shelo b'fanav. Then you have the ability to what? You have the ability to revoke the excommunication, whether in his presence or not in his presence. And I both say, what's the pshat with this? So take a look at the Ran. Really very interesting. The Ran writes as follows. So the Ran, so we're not going to do the whole thing. Top Ran on Zayin Amud Beis. The Ran writes, the chayvan de b'fanav nido. See where it says nido b'fanav ein matirin. Rabbi say right hand side. Right? We said before, Gemara just said, if you excommunicate a person in his presence, you have to undo. You have to revoke the excommunication in his presence as well. Writes the Ran, Techivan de befanav nido, since you went ahead and excommunicated him in his presence, so alim niduya, the nidui, the excommunication is very strong. V'lo me'akar ela befanav. And ultimately, again, it can only be undone in his presence as well. Dum yad demay damina parak hasholeach. Kol muzad lemisavia be'asar tzricha be'asara lemishlafa. Shabbos say the first approach of the Ran is that it's a din in the severity of the excommunication. So if you excommunicate a person in his presence, that's a more severe form of excommunication. It could only be undone in his presence as well. But then look what the Ran says, second line, middle of the second line. V'lo nehira. Ran says, I don't think that makes sense. And rather, I think the reason is like this. It's very interesting. Alataima de milsa mishum chashada. Di matirin lo shalo befanav pamim shiatiru v'amenuda lo yada ukishalo yinagu bo nidui yavo lechashada. So we'll say, listen to this. Fascinating. The Ran says it's for a more practical reason. So we'll say, if you let's say we excommunicate Reuven. Okay, so Reuven is excommunicated. So we'll say, if we undo the excommunication, now we'll say we're going to see what happens in excommunication. What happens? You're not allowed to walk in dalaramas to that person. You're not really allowed to talk to that person. You can't conduct business with that person. So imagine for a moment we excommunicate Reuven. And now what happens? We undo the excommunication. So we excommunicated him in his presence, and now we revoke the excommunication not in his presence. So what's going to happen? Monday, Reuven was excommunicated. Monday afternoon, we revoked it. Monday night, what's happening? People are giving Reuven Shalom Aleichem. He's getting Shabbos invitations, right? They're doing business with him. And I will say, from Reuven's perspective, there are two possibilities. He could think that the excommunication was revoked, or it's possible that what? People are just taking liberties with the excommunication. And it could lead to a fundamental erosion of the severity with which people approach these excommunicatory practices. Therefore, again, the Ran says, in order to avoid any misunderstandings, if a person was excommunicated in his presence, that excommunication has to be undone in his presence as well, in order that it not lead to an erosion of the severity of how we approach excommunications in general. Good. The Rosh goes on. However, again, if he was excommunicated not in his presence, right? So it already happened and now he sees people weren't interacting with me yesterday. Today they are. He'll assume that what? The excommunication was undone, was revoked. But again, that's okay. It was done in his presence, therefore revoked not in his presence as well. Good. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, good. Amar Rav Chanid, Amar Rav, we'll say incredible Gemara. Hashomei askaras Hashem mipi chavero. And we'll say, if a person hears, chas v'shalom, that his friend curses the name of Hashem. Askaras Hashem. Now askaras Hashem, we'll say, says that to mean the cursing chas v'shalom. It could also mean a taking of Hashem's name in vain. Person hears that his friend is abusing the name of Hashem, sarich lindoso. Ultimately, again, such a person himself has to be excommunicated. Ve'im lo nidu, who asked me? So what does this mean? What does this mean? If I hear my friend abusing the name of Hashem, chas v'shalom, cursing it, taking it in vain, I am obligated to take action right then and there, to literally excommunicate my friend. And if I don't take action, ve'im lo nidu, who atzmo yihei benidui. The person himself, who's the person himself? Again, I'm standing next to Reuven. I hear Reuven, go ahead and take Hashem's name in vain, or curse Hashem's name, chas v'shalom. So I'm obligated to take action and excommunicate Reuven right there. How I do that, we'll see. Right? And if I don't, and if I fail to take action, then what? Then I am held liable. I should be excommunicated. I would say, by the way, what a profound Musar Haskell. And this happens all the time. You're with someone, right, or you're with a group, and someone says something inappropriate. By the way, it doesn't have to go ahead and be the name of Hashem. It could just be something that's an immoral statement, saying it's an inappropriate statement. And I will say, what happens? People hear it and they let it go. If you hear something inappropriate, you're obligated to go ahead and take a stand. You're obligated to say something. Now, you don't have to yell at someone. You don't have to say, "Oh, such a bar Gehenim," right? See in Gehenim. You don't have to start. But I will say, the problem is, if you hear something inappropriate and you don't say something, then ultimately, again, you're lending your stempel to that statement. And halacha l'maaseh, again, a machad doesn't have to be that you start burning tires on the person's front lawn, right? Or setting dumpsters alight, But again, if you hear something inappropriate, you are obligated to say, that's not appropriate. Or, Ploni, I don't think that's the right thing to say. Or, Ploni, I love you so much, but you know what? I don't know. I don't feel comfortable with that statement. I don't think that's right. And I will say there's an obligation. And if you don't, then you are party to the act of inappropriateness. You're party to it. And you're held liable to it. So again, this is an extreme example of it, where you hear someone misusing the name of Hashem. Now again, this requires an excommunication. And if you don't take action, then you're excommunicated as well. Shekol Moko, I'll say this is so profound. Shekol Moko. Now, by the way, the Ran points out over here, if you look at the Ran, almost right across the Gemara on the right-hand side, Vim lo nidu, who asked me even nidui. So again, the Ran says, lo shiyehei nidui me'elav. So we'll say, obviously, if I hear Ruvain misuse the name of Hashem, and I don't take action, right? So now the Gemara says, I should be excommunicated. So the Ran just points out, it doesn't literally mean that I am like automatically excommunicated. Ela ro'oi le'isnados kamar, sh'amaskir atzmo tzarach nidui, v'heich yehei chamer mimenu hashomea v'shosek el kidamar. So I'll say, so of course it doesn't literally mean that if I don't take action, I'm in an immediate state of excommunication. Ultimately, again, what it means is, if I hear something inappropriate and I fail to act, I am held liable. I'll say, it's such an incredible yesod, that if you are in a place and something inappropriate is occurring, and you don't act, and I will say, by the way, I want to point out, this is by parenting also. By parenting, right? One of the most difficult things in parenting we know is you can't call out your kids for every single thing. You cannot, because if you call out your kid for every single infraction, you lose the relationship and you lose the ability to really insert yourself when something really serious goes on. But sometimes what that ends up happening is parents just kind of, not getting involved in anything. Right? So my kid does stuff, and I know it's not appropriate, but I don't want to say, again, so there is that fine line. There is that very delicate balance. But there are certain things that if my child is involved in them, my child is doing, as a parent, I have obligation to say something. And if I don't, I'm just as responsible for the commission of the act as my child is. That balance is a very difficult, but that's the Chazal is saying. Sometimes we just like to be innocent bystanders in life. And I'm not involved. If you're there, you're involved. If you're there, you're involved. And if something inappropriate goes down, then Lamaisa, you have liability for that. Such an incredible yesod. So the Gemara goes like that. Shekol makom shaskaras Hashem mitzuya was an incredible Gemara. Because any situation where the name of Hashem is misused or abused, so the Gemara says, Mitzuya sham, Shekol zman shaskaras Hashem mitzuya, sham anios mitzuya. I will say, wherever there is an abuse of the name of Hashem, ultimately, again, poverty always follows. And I will say, where do we know that from? That wherever there's an abuse of the name of Hashem, there's always poverty as well. Look at the Ran, Shekol makom, Taima ka yohev l'may da'aminon, v'im lo nidohu asmo yebenidui, she'achshav chomer d'shem aniyus mitzuya, k'tichsev, v'chol makom asher askir eshmi, avo elecha be'achticha. So we'll say, this is incredible. The Pasuk says, in any place, Hashem says, any place where you remember my name, I will come there and bless you. So the Gemara understands, from the fact that proper use of Hashem's name results in blessing, therefore what? Inappropriate misuse of Hashem's name brings the antithesis of blessing. What's the antithesis of blessing? Poverty. It's incredible. It's incredible. So there's no explicit pasuk that tells you that abuse of Shem Hashem leads me to poverty. It's just if proper use of Hashem leads to bracha, misuse of Hashem's name leads to the antithesis of bracha, ultimately poverty. Now watch this. So the Gemara says, Va'anius kimisa. And this is incredible. Ultimately, poverty is the equivalent of death. Right? Poverty is like death, right? The pauper struggles so much that it's as if he's experiencing death. Shabbos, just to understand over here, what's the idea? The idea is we're trying to figure out why is it that if I hear an abuse of the name of Hashem and I don't take action, I'm held liable, because wherever there's a misuse of Hashem's name, ultimately again, there's anios, there's poverty. We learn our poverty from the fact that that's the antithesis of bracha. Poverty is like death. Excommunication is equivalent to death. So from here we see, again, it's a little bit of a prolonged limud, but from here we see that someone who hears a misuse and abuse of the name of Hashem and fails to do anything is ultimately subject to a form of misa. What type of misa? Not obviously not actual death, but lamaisa again, excommunication. Absolutely incredible. I will say, by the way, this last piece, how do we know that poverty is like death? So the Gemara says, Shene Emar, Ki Mesu Kol Ha'anoshim. Because we'll say, by Dasan and Aviram. By Dasan, Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu that you can go, as after the burning bush, you can go back to Egypt. Go back to Egypt. Why? Because all of the people who sought your demise, right, are no longer. Who are the people who sought Moshe Rabbeinu's demise? Dasan and Aviram. And Hashem said they're dead. Dasan and Aviram weren't dead. They were alive and kicking. They caused plenty of problems in the desert as well. So why does it say they were dead? Because they became impoverished. So I will say from here you see ani chashuv kames. A poor person is like a dead person. And we'll say, we know a person struggles financially and doesn't have money. It's a pain. It's not. I mean, like it causes a pain that is like the pain of death in the eyes of Chazal. The Gemara says, "V'chol makom shenasnu chachamim einayim." The time we learn any place where Chazal. As you know, we'll say we'll stop over here for today. I ruined the streak a little bit. All right, fine. Again, we'll say incredible Gemara tomorrow as well. Also, we'll stop here. We're not finished with the sugya of Shomea Skaras Hashem. Shkayach. We'll stop here. More tomorrow.